Я родился в Казахстане, потому что много лет назад
I was born in Kazakhstan because many years ago German emigrants came to Kazakhstan at the invitation of Russian Tsar Catherine. To begin with, those Catholics lived near the Black Sea. However, they moved to Kazakhstan in 1900 and established a village called Kellerowka. In most cases, people worked on the land. My grandparents numbered amongst them. They came here voluntarily in search of land. The soil here is very fertile. They spoke German between themselves at home. They raised cattle and lived comfortably right up to the revolution. They also had their own church. Granny used to recount how she attended First Communion and how she used to go to church every Sunday in the company of many other children. Everything became more complicated after the revolution. Then there was the war, which for the majority of the population was terrible. The men were taken away and the women were left behind all alone. Many had 5, 6 children to feed. Those were very difficult times.
Боже сокровенный, славлю я Тебя, ведь под видом хлеба Ты сокрыл себя. Веруя всему, что молвил Божий Сын, нет сильнее, чем это слово истины.
The second party of immigrants, Poles and Germans in equal measure Catholic, arrived here in 1936. They were deportees.
We lived in Khmelnytsky. Ours was a very big family of 8 children. Our parents and 8 of us. I was only 8 years old at the time. They brought us here to an empty open field. There was nothing, not a single house or tree or even any water. Moreover, it was hot, 40-odd degrees. The men immediately began digging a well because people began dying from the very first day. We dug graves and buried them without coffins because there was nothing to make the coffins from. We buried them straight into the ground. Our family survived. God helped us. We all prayed to God. The children, father and mother. That is why we survived. All of us.
Молитва.
Я не могу встать. Пусть все за нами, все милосердный, о милосердный Иисус, отпусти нам наши грехи. Заховай нас przed ogniem piekielnym, zaprowadź wszystkie dusze do nich, a głównie te, które najbardziej potrzebują miłosierdzia. Baranku Boże, który gładzi grzechy świata, przepuść nas. Baranku Boże, który gładzi grzechy świata, zmiłuj się nad nami, Panie. Panie, nie jestem godzien, aby pójść do serca Twego.
Amen. Ciało Chrystusa.
Amen.
Pan z wami.
I z Duchem Świętym.
Да благословит вас Бог Wszechmogący, w imię Ojca
W imię Ojca.
i Syna i Ducha Świętego. Amen. Niech będzie pochwalony Jezus
Na
Chrystus.
wieki wieków. Amen. Panie, wysłuchaj modlitwy nasze wolę.
Объясню вам.
How's your health, Granny?
Как у вас
So.
Kiedy było?
Sometimes well, sometimes less so. They drip-fed me 10 times, as well as gave me 4 injections. And apart from the injections, morning, noon and evening, a whole handful of pills. I felt better. It passed just like that, and I thank God. God knows my needs.
How are your children?
So much work. My daughter can't manage alone, with the house and in the garden.
And then there's the heat, which makes things even harder.
Only recently so cold, and it's already so hot.
Everything planted in the garden?
Yes, including potatoes and tomatoes and cabbage and cucumbers. Everything has been planted, whilst the radish is ready to pick.
Already?
Yes, the radish and garlic and onions, and that's the lot of it.
That's very good.
But it's all hard work.
When communism began, they took everything away from them, except for one cow and one horse. That was because they were already setting up collective farms and private property was banned. Church persecutions began at about the same time. The church was wrecked and then turned into a warehouse and later into a cinema. My granny and grandfather kept the faith and were never ashamed of being Catholics. Whoever was in power, whether Stalin or Brezhnev or Khrushchev, they continued to believe and would meet for prayers every Sunday. They would go to one family and the following week to another. There was no priest. They would read the words of the Holy Mass up to the consecration, which they would omit. There'd be a moment of silence, after which they would continue reading the remainder of the Mass. Priests came secretly so that nobody would find out that a priest had come to a particular village. People will tell one another. They would then bring all the children to the particular village to be christened. And that is how it was up to the beginning of 79. It was about then that things became a little easier, though just a little. Priests eventually began to come with the appearance of Gorbachev and the beginnings of perestroika. A priest came to us in Kellerowka in 1989. There had been no priest for 56 years. During my childhood, the whole of my milieu, school, work, had been atheist. That was communism and atheism, whilst at home my granny was the first missionary. She acknowledged no one, neither atheism nor communism, and would tell us that we should believe in the risen Christ. She showed me the Bible and taught me my first prayers. It was a terrible confrontation between school and a home. At school, they would tell me, "Your granny studied for only a short time and only finished 2 classes, whilst you have finished 4 classes, which means that you are smarter than your granny. That is why you shouldn't listen to what she says, because she knows nothing." And that was how my faith was broken, and I left. Granny lived her life whilst we lived ours, though Granny never gave up and continued to talk about God whenever she could, until I joined the army. I'm sure the army is no pushover in any country. However, in the Soviet Union, military service was specific. I can't talk about many things because the army is the army. I signed a special document with a confidentiality clause because we worked on secret projects. The atmosphere there was heavy enough. There were many problems that everybody in the army had to confront. Though dealing with them, if one was not Superman, required help from on high. God's help to survive morally, survive mentally and physically. I told Granny about this, and she answered, "Child, you have to pray and God will help." And at that very moment I said, "Yes, I want to. I want to." I wrote down all the prayers that I had heard during my childhood days. Our Father, Hail Mary. When I was alone or on night watch, I used to pray the rosary. I would feel God's presence, that He is next to me. When you live your faith, it becomes every day. When you haven't believed and then you start to pray, then something incredible happens. I immediately began telling soldiers that God existed and that they must believe. They began to think that I was going slightly mad. When I returned from the army, I bought myself a Bible and began to read it. Granny told me that I should go to a priest to be christened, because many had only been christened by Granny, myself included, because there was no priest at the time. Half a year passed before I was baptized and received my first communion, and at the age of 20 went to confession. After atheism and communism, the army and everything else, it was an intense religious experience. I prayed every day, studied, attended church, and like all men, sat in the last row. I listened to the service and then went calmly home. Until that is, there was no one to read during Mass. That was when I began to read and became a lay reader. Then it turned out that there were no altar boys. Of course, I could serve amply with water. Nothing to it. After that, I was in church every day. I felt an internal voice calling me, "Go to church." A new priest arrived, Father Bronisław. After a time, he asked me, "Why don't you become a priest?" I was shocked to begin with because I had a girl, went to discos, and was an ordinary, normal human being. I hadn't thought about it. I wanted to be a Catholic, to set up a family, but to become a priest? I thought that that was not for me. Then I began to take an ever greater interest.
Увлекся вот этим. И в какой-то мере я даже уже со своей девушкой.
I talked about all of this, all the different aspects with my girl, who quite simply ran away from me. And so slowly but surely I began to feel that if that was God's will, then I would become a priest.
Мы переехали в Германию в 93-м.
We moved to Germany in '93. I went to a priest and said that I had such an aspiration. He went to a seminary with me, and I began to study in Europe. My grandparents were very pleased that I had become a priest. I understand it, and it's a great joy for them. But my parents also see that what I do makes me happy. During my ordination, my father stood up and, in front of the whole family, said that he would support me for as long as he lived. My whole family presently live in Germany. One has to admit that this is undoubtedly a country that offers opportunities that differ greatly from those available in Kazakhstan. A country in the heart of Europe, open to the whole world. I think that for anybody wanting to achieve, Europe, whether in Germany, Austria or Switzerland, offers great opportunities. However, I felt that that was not to be my way forward. My road led to the priesthood and work for the church. I later decided that it would be best if I worked in Kazakhstan, where there are few priests, I know the language, where I grew up and where I could really be useful. I believe that it is important to be where the Lord leads you.
Саш, вы в школу же можете сходить.
Ладно.
Наберите в школу.
А вы сейчас будете играть?
Саш, подождите, ребята, хорошо?
Ладно.
The church's current position in Kazakhstan is very interesting. Above all else, we live in a diaspora with very few Catholics. In percentage terms, we account for about 2.5% of the population. This, in truth, is a missionary country. There are many things that delight, but there are also many difficulties, especially as relates to contacts with Muslims. There are moments when one needs to know how to act so as not to annoy. Secondly, there are many Orthodox, and relations, though friendly and cordial, at times require a gentle approach. We need to show them that they are our brothers, that our churches are brother churches. A further problem for us is that a large part of the population has left Kazakhstan, and people continue to leave. Someone could ask, to what end a church here? I believe that the church needs to be here because we prepare people, and even if they leave somewhere, they will go with Christ's Spirit. Everything is in God's hands. Wherever God leads His church, we will follow. It is important that we should be wherever there are people who believe, who come to church, and even if we end up with one person, we will stand by him.
Меня зовут Дима, я родился My name is Dima. I was born in Kazakhstan, in Kokshetau, in 1986. My mother is Polish, and my father Ukrainian. My mother's ancestors were deported from Zhytomyr in the Ukraine in 1936.
My name is Katya. My mother is Russian, whilst my father has German roots. My grandfather, who was a German, lived in the Ukraine. During the war, they were deported to Kazakhstan, which is why they later settled here. We were married in August 2007.
The presence of Father Alexander is very important for us. I knew him long before he came to Kornievka. We got to know each other thanks to football, through the annual Altar Boys Diocesan Championships. I used to take part in these when I was an altar boy. When he came here and got to know our family, we experienced something completely new together, something that we had never experienced before.
I noticed that he was full of ideas from the very beginning, and I thought that he would begin many of them, but would not finish them all. But now, at the end of the year, I can see that a youth group has been set up, a nursery group. The priest also celebrates Holy Mass for the sisters and visits the elderly. But what is most important for me is that Father Alexander has become my friend. He is the first priest friend in my life. I can share my personal experiences with him. I can even complain, and yet he always strengthens me.
Kazakhstan continues to be a country that is hungry for priests. The whole country has about 80-odd priests, which is why we're always pleased when a new priest appears. God is always near, but it's more difficult without a priest. I lived in a parish 14 kilometers from a church. A priest would come once a month. Only if you find yourself in this situation do you appreciate how important this is. A layperson cannot dispense the sacraments. We can only do what is necessary up to the sacraments. But it is the sacraments that are what is most important in the church. We, as well as every youth group, need a priest to confess, to celebrate the Holy Mass, to receive the Holy Sacrament, without which a Christian life is impossible.
Every day I think myself happy. Every day since I have worked here. Of course, you will not find people without problems. They will always appear and will have to be solved. Solving these problems, trying to defeat them, makes me happy. God offers advice during times of prayer, shows what is right, where the truth lies, as well as gives the strength you need to fulfill what He has shown you. He also gives joy. There is a moment of joy when you feel pleased with where you are. You begin to understand that what you are doing makes sense. Sense for the church, sense for you, makes sense for your salvation, as well as somebody else's redemption, whoever wants it. Some people understand why I came back to Kazakhstan, and they support me, aware of the need, because there are people in Kazakhstan who need me, people who want to believe, who want to get to know God, who want to do something for children and young people to ensure the old are not forgotten, continue to live here. These people cannot leave, will never leave. One must work with them here. I feel that this is my place, which is why I am here. I believe that every human being has a calling, because God created human beings based on a concrete plan for the benefit of mankind and God's glory. Finding that calling in one's life is something very important. Finding one's place in life is very important, and it is only possible if one lives with God. If you ask him, "Where is my place? What should I do?" you will be happy once you have recognized that calling, a calling that you recognize as your own. This is mine, because I have found myself in what I do. I feel that I am where I should be, and I want to work here, where God has put me.